My professional experience with parental alienation is that very often the term is overused, and it relates more to gatekeeping and insecure parenting. And often, especially as the children are getting a little bit older, people tend to want to play to the children as an audience because they're becoming adults. They're adult-like. And what people who are busily trying to sway a child's opinion about both parents, really, but especially have a negative opinion for the other parent, they don't realize how, as a child, it's very natural for that child to agree with them on that day and disagree with them when they're with the other parent. If they're successful in demonizing the relationship between the child and the parent, it very often winds up being the one thing that destroys their relationship with their children after they've left the house. So you're playing a high stakes game that can be relatively bloody, that is going to give you 72 months of success, something like that, and possibly sacrificing all those things that your children mean to you as you age. That what you're leaving behind is the happy wedding, the bar mitzvah or baptism, the school play, all those things that are happening for your grandchildren. And people don't understand how it is very much of a short game.
Well, I think that any practicing divorce lawyer would say that they see it on a regular basis. There's a lot of controversy in terms of the psychology and whether or not it's a syndrome and things of that nature, but it is very real. I have a trial starting on Monday of next week, and that's the elephant in the room, whether or not the father in that case has alienated a mentally ill daughter against the mother. So I see it all the time.
Parental alienation is kind of a controversial topic and a controversial label in the mental health field. And I think that people need to understand that it's a spectrum. I think there's a little bit of parental alienation that happens in almost all contested custody cases. And then it can go, from some mild parental alienation behaviors to some very devastating ones.
So to me, there's no question parental alienation is a thing. It does exist. The problem is it's overused and the term is used a lot, and the person who coined the term has been discredited in a lot of ways. So people hear about that and they read about Richard Gardner, who was the first one to use the term. He had some strange thoughts about, how young girls can be to bear children, and you can really get caught up in the weeds. Alienation happens. Is it a syndrome? There's no psychological designation. Is it the same as being diagnosed as bipolar? No, there's no psychological diagnosis of parental alienation syndrome. So it's a confusing term, but do parents alienate? Absolutely. The question is, is it intentional? Is it not intentional? I think it's a trigger word, and some judges see that it's overused and they don't like people saying, oh, yeah, another person that's claiming alienation. It's just like a narcissist. Every person that comes into my office says they're married to a narcissist. I mean, it just, and some of them are right. Some of them are more narcissistic than the others. But alienation is a problem. And I think alienation is sort of the reverse of what we should be focusing on, which is how do you promote the love and respect of the children for the parents? And what I tell my clients is that the people that usually do better in custody disputes, the person that usually is awarded custody, is the person that says the most nice things about the other side, right? Because if you're the judge and you have to decide which parent is going to get custody, and one parent saying, he's a jerk, he's a bad person, and the other parent saying, me and him don't get along, but you know what? He's their father, the children love him, I want to make sure the children always love him. I like this person. I'm going to make sure that person has more power to control the children's future than this person. So the reverse of alienation is affection, right? Who's the parent that promotes the affection and good feelings for the other side? If children don't like a parent, it's a hard one. Is it because the other parent alienated and convinced the children not to like that parent? Or is it because the other parent is just so unlikable that nobody would like them, even their own children? It's a hard one. And I think people they latch onto that term because it explains a lot. Why don't my children like me? There are two answers, right? And one answer is because I'm unlikable. The other answer is because the other parent has convinced them not to like me. Which answer would you choose? I mean, we'd all say, well, if it's one of those two, it's not because I'm unlikable. It's got to be that she or he is making the children not like me. So people use that term a lot. It's a hard one. Psychologists can't even figure out necessarily who's causing it. But if you track the history, you can see the texts and the emails. The parent that sticks to, nope, you're supposed to pick them up at 6 o'clock, you're late, you don't get them, versus the parent who says, you're late to pick up the kids? That's fine, we're just hanging out. You mind if I feed them something because they're a little bit hungry? Just come whenever you want. You know, you can see who's an alienator and who's an affection giver. And but it's out there. It's just, it's overused. So be careful if you walk into court, march into court and saying, alienation, alienation. Judges might hear that and say, yeah, well, maybe you're part of the problem too. So you never know when you use the term alienation.
With respect to this parental alienation question, I think parental alienation is very frequently pled or pleaded. In my experience with it, it is much less frequently proven or even provable than it is when someone pleads it. True parental alienation is a pretty extreme situation. And so I see a lot of people using the claim of parental alienation for leverage, when in truth, in fact, it really isn't a parental alienation case at all. We had a case recently that I cannot be more specific about because it's not concluded, but there are 4 expert witnesses that will be addressing parental alienation in this case. And their views are pretty substantially disparate. Obviously, you would expect that because someone is hiring one side and someone is hiring the other side. But what I think you will find is that it's a rare case that really is an example of parental alienation, but there is an enormous cottage industry that has built up around parental alienation cases. And so I take them largely with a grain of salt. Not the true cases. True parental alienation cases are very serious. You need an expert. You need some very focused mental health help for the child in that situation. But more often than not, it's parental alienation becomes the boogeyman that gets brought out and you make an allegation, the other side immediately has to deny it. And then what you're really looking at is you're a parent either trying to use it as leverage or who just doesn't have the same emotional connection with the child. And they view the lack of that connection as somehow the fault of the other parent. So I would say most parental alienation cases aren't. Those that are, and it is a small number, really are quite serious. You need an expert consultant as quickly in the case as you can get one. They are very challenging cases.
My professional experience with parental alienation has been that it is difficult to prove. It is damaging to the child or children. And the clients that I have who are patient in allowing a proper therapeutic process to occur to reunite a child with a parent who's been alienated is the best answer. I think that a lot of times the parents who have been alienated by the other parent or the child want to rush into creating a new relationship with that child, and you need to give it some time, and you need to go through the process.
Parental alienation, in my experience, is how pervasive it is, blows my mind. Parents, even in intact marriages, either intentionally or unintentionally, sometimes work to alienate children against them because they're in a competitive environment for the love of the children. And some parents rely upon that emotional feedback from their kids to bolster their own self-worth. And that sounds horrible, but it's manifested on just about every soccer game you go see with the kids. Some parents out there yelling advice to the coach, telling the kid to run harder, get the ball, kick the ball. There's no reason for that, okay? Same thing with it at home. Your mother said you can't do that, otherwise I'd let you. Okay? You're setting the other parent up for failure. And then after separation or divorce, it's very clear, could be very subtle. One of the things, either intentional or unintentional, it's almost always subtle. For example, Tommy, I know you want to go to that competitive soccer camp out of town next summer, but your dad's behind on his child support. Or I can't afford that on the small amount your father pays us on child support. So we're going to have to ask him, and he's going to say no, that he can't afford it. Either way, having that discussion with the child is inappropriate, and it's going to cause alienation, either in a very small, subtle way. But that's what alienation does. It gives you death by 1,000 cuts. And you're setting your child up for failure as an adult when you do that, because they're not going to be able to trust people. And if you can't trust, you can't have a relationship. But if you can't have a relationship, you're not going to have as good of a life, because marriage is a great stabilizing force for productivity and exploration of life, no question. So also keep in mind, we have a number of parental alienation videos. We have a 4-part series where we go into that in a lot more detail on our YouTube channel, Miles Mason Family Law Group.
Advice I would have for parents who are targets of parental alienation. Get therapy right away with that situation, and be careful how you label this. Sometimes people call it parental alienation when it might not be. And it might be more something in yourself as a parent that you're doing that's alienating yourself from the child as opposed to somebody else doing it. So be sure you're checking in and aware of your own behavior. If you've ever been to therapy or have worked with therapists, one of the first, things they want you to figure out is that you're aware of yourself and how your actions, are perceived by others if you're having, difficulties.
My experience has been that for the client that feels they're being alienated, it's generally better to focus on the overall best interests of the child and how to make that case in court than it is to focus all your efforts on trying to label the other parent as an alienator. That can sometimes backfire, and I think judges are just really interested in always keeping the focus on the child.
What advice would I give to parents who are targets of parental alienation? Well, I wish I knew the answer to that. It is so pervasive and so insidious. It's very, very difficult to confront. You've got to hang in there and hope you have a lot of money that you can hire experts that can come in and identify it. And you want to be able to get the best legal representation you can that can shed light on this. By ignoring it and hoping it gets better, it won't. That's the other thing. Not unlike the bully personality we talked about before, you've got to confront it and try to work through it.
So that's a hard one. If you're a target of parental alienation, how do you deal with it? How do you react to it? It's hard because sometimes you fight it and it pushes the children further away. And it gives the other side more ammo. See, mom or dad is just paying the lawyers to try to prove that I'm a bad person. It's a really hard one. How do you defend parental alienation? And I could be Mahatma Gandhi here, and I could be a peacemaker and say, you know what you do? Just kill them with kindness, fill them with love, no matter what they say about you. But we're human, and we get fed up. But I think if you can err on the side of forgiveness and saying, here's who I am. I think sooner or later kids get smart. Mark Twain had a famous comment, and I'm going to misquote him, but it was something about how it's amazing how smart my parents got from when I was 15 until I turned 18. The kids grow up and they start to realize maybe mom wasn't all bad. Maybe dad wasn't all bad. So I think time tells, and you have a long life. One thing I would do is I would keep a diary or write letters to your kids, whether you send them or not, and save them so they can see them when they're older. When a child's 30 years old and comes to you and says, Mom, how come you didn't fight for custody of me? How come you didn't try to get custody? Here's the letter. Let me show you what I tried to do and why it didn't work, what dad did when children are older. But how do you fight? There's no winning strategy to fighting parental alienation except for get all the witnesses you can to prove that you're a good mom or good dad. Put it up in front of the judge and hope the judge sees through it. I think another way to fight it is with neutrals, whether it's a guardian ad litem or a caseworker or a psychologist. If you can get a neutral into it that can sort of agree with you that you're being alienated, if that person says to the judge, dad is causing alienation, that's more believable. When a client walks into the judge and says, Judge, my kids don't like me because of dad, the judge might think the person's unlikable. But when a neutral person comes in and says, Judge, I'm not on anybody's side, I'm on the kid's side. I've talked to the kids, I've talked to mom, I've talked to her best friend, I've talked to dad, I've talked to grandpa, I've talked to the lawyers. I got an idea what's going on. Then the judge is gonna say, well, you're neutral, tell me what's going on. I think the mom's a pretty good person and dad's sort of making the kids not like her, or the kids are afraid to tell her that they really love her because they don't want to hurt dad's feelings. I think dad's got some fixing to do, Judge. And so if I was you, I'd give mom more time than you're thinking of giving her, because whatever you give her is all she's going to get. Dad's not going to give her extra time. Mom is going to let the kids go back. Dad's going to control it. So if you can get a neutral, a court-ordered neutral, that's probably the best way to fight alienation. If you have the money, a psychologist. If you don't, maybe a court-ordered neutral like a guardian or a CASA. From state to state, it's different. Somebody who can tell the court what's best for the children based on what they've seen, and that's not on either party's side.
It's really important not to play into the game. If you're the parent who is on the other end of someone's effort to alienate the relationship between your children and yourself, it's really important not to play me too. And I don't want to misuse that term in the sense of how popular it is for women's rights. What I mean by that is you don't want to say, well, your mom also failed in this way, or your dad didn't do this, or even bicker about what's true or not. Anchoring things back into the very real relationship that a child has and focusing on what that child wants and needs. Part of the illness of parental alienation is that the dialogue a child begins to hear isn't centered around what that child's life is about. It's centered and hyper-focuses on the child's relationship with their parents. And kids aren't that darn interested in their relationships with their parents. They're a fundamental relationship that will hold them through time. Every kid has got moments in time in which they don't like one or the other or both of their parents, especially if the parents are doing their job. What a parent really needs to do is to spend more time listening, engaging, and being interested in the child's life and what they're interested in than interested in the politics of co-parenting.
For parents who are the target of alienation, your first stop is probably your family law attorney from your divorce. We hear these questions, we have these discussions, and our job as family lawyers is to give out options to the parents who are facing this. Most of the time, our advice is don't ignore it. It's not going to get better with time. It's only going to get worse, both in attempt and in efficiency. All right. Now, the second stop may be a mental health professional, a psychologist familiar with the legal system and familiar helping families work through parental alienation problems. Now, in particular, what the parent who is the victim needs to do is get some strategies for that particular situation and that particular spouse. And there are a number of tools and techniques that are out there that need to be covered. For example, there's software available for parents to communicate and have their schedule. And so all the communication is recorded. Right? Now, but how do we find out about parental alienation? Usually from the kids. Mom said you said this. Dad said you said that. that sort of thing, which makes it incredibly difficult because then you're in a position of you having to possibly interrogate your own child to find out what's going on. So my advice is to work with a mental health professional on that, and to know to get some information without destroying your credibility and your honesty with the child by including them in the investigation. So it's a very, very difficult situation for anybody with half a brain that's rational and reasonable to deal with another parent essentially working hard to destroy a child's love, trust, and engagement with the other parent, because all it's going to do is damage them in the long run.